There are moments in life when the world around us begins to blur, when what once made sense no longer holds meaning. And in the silence between heartbeats, a strange longing rises. Not for more, but for something else. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky stood at the threshold of such a moment. Born into Russian nobility, raised in salons of intellect and dogma, she had every reason to follow the well-worn path: church, family, decorum. But something deeper stirred within her. A restlessness, a whisper, a question no priest could answer and no book could silence. What is truth? Really? She had tasted the comforts of high society. She had witnessed the rituals of religion and the debates of science. But neither the crucifix nor the microscope offered her peace. Not because she was arrogant, but because she was honest. And in that honesty, she felt a wound, one that many of us know too well. How many times have you felt it? That quiet ache, the sense that something vital is missing, not out there but inside, that despite our success, our possessions, our knowledge, something essential remains untouched, unnamed, unknown. Blavatsky felt it too, and she refused to numb it. While others settled into certainty, she leaned into mystery. She abandoned the salons. She closed the holy books. She turned her back on all that was expected of a woman of her class and walked into the unknown. But why? What compels someone to leave everything behind? Language, land, name, identity, and embark on a journey across oceans, deserts, and mountains? The answer is not written in any passport or travelogue. It is written in the soul of the seeker. And Helena was a seeker of the rarest kind. She didn't want to believe. She wanted to know. She didn't want to kneel. She wanted to see. She wasn't chasing salvation. She was hunting truth. And that truth, she believed, was buried in the East. In the early years of her life, Helena devoured every fragment of mystical knowledge she could find: Kabbalah, Hermeticism, Christian Gnosticism. But each system, though rich, felt like a broken shard of a once great mirror. She wanted to find the source, the fire, not just the sparks. And so she boarded ships with false names, crossed borders with forged papers, walked paths where no map dared go: India, Egypt, Syria. Always moving eastward, not following a road, but following a call. But let us be clear, this was not mere curiosity. It was a sacred hunger, a spiritual homesickness. To the eyes of the world, she was reckless, a runaway, a madwoman. But inwardly, she was more awake than ever. Something inside her knew that the East held not just teachings, but keys. Keys to unlock the great riddles. Why are we here? What survives death? What is consciousness? She didn't go to the temples to pray. She went to listen. She didn't seek priests. She sought sages. And the further she moved from the dogmas of the West, the clearer her mind became. As if a veil was lifting, she began to realize something profound. That truth is not taught, it is remembered. And that remembering requires silence, solitude, and surrender. It wasn't easy. She faced disease, poverty, betrayal. She nearly died more than once. But every hardship stripped away another layer of illusion. By the time she reached the edges of the Himalayas, she was no longer a Russian noblewoman. She was something else. Something raw, distilled, ready. Ready for what? Even she didn't know. But she could feel it pulsing beneath the surface of her being. Something ancient. Watching. Waiting. Was it destiny? Karma? Or perhaps simply the answer that comes when the question is finally pure? Blavatsky would later write, "There is no religion higher than truth." But in these early years, she wasn't writing yet. She was walking, climbing, listening. And it is here, at the edge of civilization, at the beginning of something sacred, that we pause. Because this is not just her story, it is ours. How many of us have felt what she felt, that this world with all its glitter and noise cannot fill the deeper hunger? How many have dared, like her, to listen to the voice beneath the noise, the voice that says, "Go further, go deeper, there is more"? This was the call of the East, not a place, not a direction, but a vibration, a memory, a return. And on that day, when Helena turned her back on everything she knew and walked into the unknown, she wasn't just beginning a journey. She was answering a call that echoes in every soul that dares to awaken. By the mid-19th century, Helena Blavatsky had crossed oceans, walked deserts, and stared into the eyes of empires. Yet her true journey was only beginning. She arrived in India like a phantom moving through time, alone, anonymous, with little more than her will and an unshakable inner pull. She was no longer chasing places. She was following signs, the scent of sandalwood, the murmur of sacred texts, the hush of the Ganges at dawn. It stirred something ancient within her. She wandered through Madras, Benares, Bombay, absorbing fragments of mysticism like a puzzle she was born to complete. But one destination haunted her above all: Tibet, that forbidden land locked between the mountains and the clouds, a kingdom of silence, a sanctuary for the hidden, a place untouched by the dogmas of the West and fiercely protected from outsiders. Helena tried to reach it. She failed. Her first attempt to enter the land of the lamas was met with resistance, physical, political, and spiritual. She was turned away, ill, weakened, and alone. For most, it would have been the end. But for her, it was a sign. The door was not locked. It simply wasn't time. It is here that something strange begins to take shape. Not in the physical world, but in the invisible currents around her. She starts to speak, quietly, cryptically of them, the masters. At first only in whispers, later with conviction. They were not myths to her, not metaphors, but living beings, guardians of a wisdom so old, so pure, that it had withdrawn from the noise of the world. And one of them began to appear. He came in visions, in dreams, in chance meetings that defied logic. Tall, dignified, dark eyes that held the weight of centuries. His presence was overwhelming, yet never frightening. She would later name him Moria. But what mattered was not his name, it was his impact. From the moment she encountered him, her life was no longer hers. He didn't give her comfort, he gave her work. He didn't offer answers, he offered tests. He didn't ask for devotion, he demanded transformation. And Helena, stubborn, proud, skeptical, submitted, not to him, but to the process. This is the part of the story that no historian can measure. Because what was happening wasn't external, it was internal. It was initiation. She was being undone. Her body was weary. Her mind often pushed to the edge. She lost friendships. She lost stability. At times she questioned her own sanity, but always he was there, guiding from a distance, correcting her course, testing her faith, not in him, but in herself. This period in her life was what mystics have long called the dark night of the soul. It's not darkness in the sense of evil. It's darkness in the sense of absence. The absence of clarity, the absence of comfort, the absence of self. It is the moment when the old you begins to die, so that something new may be born. Have you felt it? That season of your life when everything familiar slips through your hands, when the world no longer fits and your reflection feels foreign? It's not a failure. It's not a punishment. It's a calling, a sacred dismemberment. And for Blavatsky, it was the price of awakening. She didn't speak much about what happened during those early years in India. Not in detail, not publicly, because some experiences live beyond words, and some truths protect themselves through silence. But she hinted. She hinted at journeys through hidden valleys and nights spent in ancient sanctuaries. She hinted at languages not spoken by men and teachings that came not from books, but from transmission. She hinted at a presence, not just near her, but within her. The master was not simply guiding her. He was awakening something latent, a memory, a purpose, a vow taken long before this lifetime. By the time she left India, she was changed. She had not yet reached Tibet, but Tibet had already begun to reach her. What she sought was no longer behind gates or guarded by terrain. It was rising from within, as if her soul had remembered its shape. And so she continued. not because she had found the truth, but because she had found the path. And once the path calls you, truly calls you, there is no going back. This is something that only those who have crossed the threshold can understand. That at a certain point in life, often in the second half, when the masks begin to slip and the noise begins to fade, we start to hear it. A whisper, a tug at the center of the chest, not regret, not nostalgia, but summoning. It asks nothing and yet demands everything. It has no words, and yet speaks directly to the soul. It is the same call that led Helena away from society, from comfort, from certainty. The same call that guided her through disease, through exile, through ridicule. The same call that led her not to a place, but to a presence. And perhaps, just perhaps, it is the same call you are beginning to hear now. No official document records the moment Helena Blavatsky crossed into Tibet. No map confirms her path. No witness could describe her entry. And perhaps that is exactly how it had to be. Some doors do not open with permission. They open when the soul is ready. And Helena, after years of wandering, breaking, listening, was finally ready. It is said that her passage into the forbidden land came not through gates, but through grace. Not by force, but by alignment. She was no longer seeking Tibet as a place on a map. She had become a vibration that Tibet could receive. And somewhere, in that vast and veiled land between clouds and peaks, she arrived. The air was thinner, the silence heavier. Every step echoed not on the ground, but within. The Himalayas did not welcome her with banners or ceremony. They welcomed her with stillness. And it was here that Helena Blavatsky encountered something more profound than teachings or temples. She encountered the void, not emptiness in the Western sense, not nothingness, but the sacred emptiness of space that holds everything. The womb of the universe, the place from which all arises and to which all returns. She was no longer surrounded by noise, by cities, by explanations. Now there was only mountain and sky, rock and wind, silence, and the self. But it wasn't the silence that startled her. It was what the silence revealed, because when the world becomes quiet enough, the mind can no longer hide behind its stories. All masks fall, all titles dissolve, and the ego, so carefully constructed through years of identity and opinion, begins to tremble. She had come seeking wisdom, but what greeted her first was unlearning. The monks she encountered in the hidden monasteries of Tibet were unlike any teachers she had known. They asked no questions. They offered no answers. They simply were, present, grounded, awake. They moved like still water. Their words, when spoken, carried the weight of mountains. And Helena, who had once stood proudly against theologians and scholars, now found herself quiet, not silenced by suppression, but stilled by recognition. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that to learn the invisible, one must first forget everything they believe they know. The teachings were not lectures. They were conditions. They were atmospheres. And in that rarefied space, something began to happen inside her. The thoughts that had once rushed through her mind like rivers slowed. The narratives she had clung to, about who she was, where she came from, what she had to prove, began to unravel. She was not becoming someone new. She was ceasing to be. Day by day, ego peeled away. Not in drama, but in dissolution. She began to see that the self she had defended so fiercely was never solid, only a mirage formed by memory and desire, and in its place was silence. Pure, alive, expansive silence. It didn't offer her praise. It didn't grant her comfort. But it gave her something infinitely more valuable: clarity. She saw that the noise of the world, its ambitions, arguments, even its philosophies, was a barrier to true perception. The real teachings weren't in the texts. They were in the wind, in the gaze of a lama who had stared into eternity, in the ritual of making tea without hurry, in the breath. And slowly, Blavatsky began to vanish. not in body, but in form. The woman who had arrived as a seeker, a rebel, an intellect, began to dissolve into something softer, deeper, emptier. And yet, in that emptiness, she found herself more full than ever. She no longer needed to conquer knowledge. She needed to receive it. She no longer tried to define truth. She let truth reshape her. And this was the first true initiation, not given by a master, but by the void itself. A stripping away of illusion, a rebirth in silence. And perhaps this is why the masters allowed her in, because she had proven, not with words but with surrender, that she was ready to forget. And only when one forgets who they think they are, can they remember who they have always been. This is the lesson that many of us avoid, even as we age. We cling to the stories of our lives. We guard our identities like fortresses. But what if the soul is asking us to let go? What if the true awakening comes not from acquiring more books, more beliefs, more titles, but from laying it all down and standing bare before the infinite? In Tibet, Blavatsky did not become enlightened, but she stepped into the current of something vast and ancient, something beyond understanding. And in that current she disappeared. There, in that great silence, Helena began to vanish, not as a loss, but as a beginning. Because when the ego dissolves, when the noise dies down, when there is nothing left but awareness itself, that is when the real journey begins. There was no ceremony, no proclamation, no rite of passage marked in the sand. And yet, somewhere between the chants of the lamas and the silence of the snow-covered peaks, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky became a Buddhist, not in name, not in affiliation, but in essence. She did not adopt robes, she did not shave her head, she did not kneel before statues or memorize sutras for recognition. Instead, something much deeper unfolded. She began to see as the lamas saw, not through the lens of doctrine but through direct perception. What the Western world called mysticism, the monks called clarity. What others called faith, they lived as experience. She lived among them for a time that she never clearly defined, perhaps intentionally. Time in that realm was fluid, immaterial. Days passed in meditation, rituals, silence. Nights unfolded under star-blanketed skies, in conversations that dissolved the boundaries between self and cosmos. She absorbed teachings not from scrolls, but from presence, from gestures, from stillness, from paradox. At the heart of these transmissions was a name she came to revere. Vajradhara, not a god, not a myth. Vajradhara is the embodiment of the highest wisdom in Tibetan Buddhism, the source of the esoteric doctrine, the primordial Buddha, the still center beyond time and form. Through his image, through mantra, through symbolic vision, Helena was introduced to truths that Western science had no vocabulary for. From the Mahayana school, she learned of compassion as the heartbeat of reality, not as sentiment but as law, that all beings are linked not through suffering, but through the potential to awaken, that to walk the path is not to escape the world, but to serve it, silently, from within. She studied impermanence, not as a concept, but as a lived experience, to watch thought arise and pass, to feel emotion bloom and dissolve, to understand that all phenomena are fleeting shadows on the wall of the infinite. And above all, she was introduced to the mysterious truth of shunyata, emptiness. But it was not emptiness as void. It was the luminous, open, interdependent nature of all things. Nothing is fixed, nothing is isolated. All is process, relationship, flux. These were not beliefs to adopt. They were doors. And Helena walked through them, not once, but again and again. Each time she thought she understood, the teaching deepened. Each certainty was dissolved into a higher paradox. The final veil lifted when she encountered the principle that would forever separate her from the West, non-duality, that the observer and the observed are one, that there is no self apart from the world, that mind, matter, and spirit are not categories but modes of a single, infinite expression. This shattered her last remaining Western frameworks. Materialism, with its rigid binaries and linear thinking, could no longer hold her. Religions that divided humanity into saved and damned, sacred and profane, lost their grip. She had crossed a threshold few even recognize exists, not from one faith to another, but from belief to direct knowledge. And in that place, she realized something essential. To be a Buddhist is not to follow a system. It is to awaken from illusion, to understand how the mind creates suffering, through grasping, through aversion, through ignorance, and how liberation is not gifted by gods but uncovered through awareness. Helena did not become Buddhist by conversion. She recognized in Buddhism what she had always known, but had no words for. In its esoteric form, Buddhism mirrored the ancient universal teachings she had glimpsed in Egypt, in Greece, in the heart of the Vedas, not as separate traditions, but as a single flame seen through many windows. And in that understanding, she began to let go of identity altogether. Nationality, religion, culture, these were temporary garments. What mattered now was the eternal garment, the soul in its journey through lifetimes, through karma, through planes of consciousness. For Helena, the Buddhist path was not an end, it was a beginning. It gave her not answers, but tools. It did not fill her mind, it emptied it, so that truth could speak directly. She would later write, "The path is not found in books. It is carved in silence, walked in solitude, and revealed in service." And what does this mean for us, those listening perhaps decades into our own lives? It means that wisdom does not belong to the young, or to those with time. It belongs to those who are ready to see, ready to unlearn, ready to surrender certainty for depth. We live in a world obsessed with answers, with fast conclusions, with names and labels. But Helena discovered that truth is found only when we are brave enough to stand in not knowing. In a modern world of distraction, division, and noise, her journey whispers something urgent to us. We've been looking outward, but the door was always within. To be Buddhist, she learned, was not to belong to a group. It was to wake up from the dream of separation. And in that awakening, she didn't find a religion. She found herself. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky never saw herself as a follower. She wasn't built to kneel. She was built to inquire. And so, when she finally began to describe herself as Buddhist, it was not a confession. It was a statement of alignment, not to a church, not to a dogma, but to a vision, timeless, universal, liberated from form. She embraced Buddhism not as a religion, but as a philosophy of consciousness, a map of the mind, a tool for awakening. And more than that, she saw it as a surviving branch of something even older, a primordial wisdom that had once flowed through Egypt, Chaldea, India, Greece, before men built altars, before they carved lines in the sand. She called it the ancient wisdom. Others called it the perennial philosophy. And to her, esoteric Buddhism was one of its purest remaining expressions. This was not a Buddhism of rituals and robes. It was the hidden core, veiled behind the outer teachings, passed silently from master to initiate. In it she found not beliefs to defend, but laws to observe. Not commandments from a god, but patterns woven into the fabric of existence itself. She spoke of karma, not as divine punishment, but as the most elegant of natural laws. Cause and effect, action and reaction, extending beyond the physical into thought, intention, energy. In the West, morality had become fear-based, rooted in heaven or hell. But Blavatsky learned that in the East, accountability was internal. We are not judged, we are simply reflected, and life gives back what we put into motion. She embraced reincarnation not as dogma, but as logic. How could a single lifetime be enough to learn all the lessons of the soul? Growth is not instant. It unfolds, across bodies, across epochs. Each life a page in the book of a being far greater than we appear. And compassion, the heart of the Mahayana path, was not just virtue, but law in motion. A recognition that all life is bound together, that to harm another is to harm oneself, that the highest form of wisdom is service. This was not the religion she had been taught in childhood. That religion had commandments carved in stone. It had clergy, hierarchy, and threats of eternal fire. But here, among monks who owned nothing, who spoke little, who lived humbly in silence, she found something radical. A religion without religion. One that didn't divide, but united. That didn't demand faith, but invited discovery. That didn't ask for worship, but for awakening. And this changed everything. She began to see that the original function of religion was not to bind people into groups, but to reconnect them to the sacred within. The word itself, religare, means to bind back, to bind the soul back to its source. But over time, religions had turned into institutions, power structures, walls, and Blavatsky was not interested in walls. She wanted bridges. She believed that all true religions emerged from the same source, and that the divisions between them were artificial, created by fear and control. She once wrote, "There is no higher religion than truth." And for her, truth was not confined to any book or prophet. It was a living flame, found in the silence of meditation, in the rigor of self-inquiry, in the surrender to the unknown. She did not ask her students to become Buddhists. She asked them to become free, to unshackle themselves from inherited beliefs, to test everything through their own consciousness, to replace blind faith with lived experience. And isn't that what many of us crave? Especially now in the later chapters of our lives, when the noise begins to feel hollow, when the answers we were given as children no longer satisfy the questions that have deepened with age, when we feel, often without words, that something vast and eternal waits just beneath the surface, if only we could still ourselves enough to touch it. Blavatsky walked that path, not because it was easy, but because she could no longer lie to herself. The truth demanded everything and gave her more in return. She saw clearly what so many fear to admit, that many religions have become prisons of certainty, and the soul was never meant to live behind bars. She wanted to liberate the spiritual instinct from dogma, to return the sacred to the seeker, to ignite the divine not in temples or churches, but in the heart, the mind, the soul. And in that vision she stood alone, admired by some, hated by many, understood by few. But she was not interested in approval. She had seen the real. And once you've seen it, you cannot go back. She had no need to convert anyone. She only pointed to the path. And for those willing to walk it, she offered this reminder: there is no faith greater than the truth within. The world we inhabit today is not the same world that Helena Blavatsky walked through in the 19th century. And yet, in many ways, it is. Different cities, different technologies, different distractions, but the same yearning. Beneath the layers of urgency, of headlines, of endless scrolling, something ancient still stirs within us, a quiet ache, a feeling that we are missing something essential, that we have become strangers in our own minds, disconnected from our own souls. We live in a time of profound acceleration. Everything is faster: communication, consumption, ambition. But in all this speed, something precious is lost: presence. We are surrounded by information, yet starved of wisdom. We can speak with anyone but rarely listen to ourselves. We are constantly connected, and yet feel more alone than ever. And in this collective noise, the seeker begins to wake up, not in rebellion, but in recognition. Recognition that this life, this fleeting sacred breath we carry, is not meant to be wasted in distraction. Blavatsky's journey into the East was not just physical. It was psychological, spiritual, symbolic. And today, for those of us walking through the fog of modern life, her discoveries offer a map, not to escape the world, but to re-enter it with clarity, depth, and soul. So what did she learn that we can carry? First, the practice of detachment. Blavatsky let go of everything: her name, her homeland, her identity, not out of rejection, but out of realization that clinging is the root of suffering. In our world, we cling to roles: mother, father, boss, citizen. We cling to opinions, to achievements, to certainty. But what if freedom begins when we loosen our grip, not abandoning responsibility, but releasing the illusion that any of it defines who we truly are? Second, the humility of not knowing. Blavatsky was brilliant. She had read more books than most could name, but when she reached the feet of the masters, she said nothing. She listened. In that humility, a door opened. Today, so many of us feel pressured to have answers, to be experts, to know more, to explain everything. But wisdom begins when we can admit, I don't know. Because in that space, something deeper than thought can arise. The soul doesn't grow through information, it grows through receptivity. Third, the power of silence. Blavatsky discovered that the silence of the Himalayas was not empty. It was alive. It healed her. It taught her. It held truths that no word could carry. And yet, how many of us today fear silence? We fill every moment with noise, music, podcasts, notifications, because silence confronts us with ourselves. But perhaps that's exactly what we need. True silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of being. It is where wounds begin to mend, where clarity returns, where the voice of the soul can finally be heard. Fourth, the path of self-knowledge. Blavatsky did not find the divine in temples. She found it through introspection, through honest inquiry into her own consciousness, and so it remains. The spiritual journey is not a pilgrimage to a holy site. It is a return to the sacred center within, not a temple built by hands, but a temple built by awareness. In an age obsessed with appearances, where identity is curated, filtered, and monetized, Blavatsky reminds us that the most radical act is to know yourself, to sit with your mind, to witness your emotions without judgment, to explore the patterns of thought that shape your reality, because once you see them, you are no longer ruled by them. This is what it means, in the deepest sense, to wake up, not to convert, not to adopt a new belief system, but to shed illusion, layer by layer. Blavatsky did not become a Buddhist in the way society defines it. She became one by awakening from the dream of separation. And that awakening is still available, right now, wherever you are. You do not need to cross a desert or climb a mountain. You only need to be willing to turn inward, to be honest, to be still. Because in truth, every moment is a monastery, every breath is a mantra, every silence is a gate. What Blavatsky found in Tibet was not hidden behind walls, it was hidden beneath her own thoughts. And once she found it, she dedicated her life to sharing it, not as a doctrine, but as a mirror for the modern soul, for the mature seeker who knows that life must be more than consumption, more than performance, more than routine. So ask yourself, in the privacy of your own heart, what am I really seeking? And am I brave enough to find it? Because perhaps to become a Buddhist today does not mean joining anything. It means awakening. Awakening from the trance of society. Awakening from fear. Awakening from the idea that peace is out there. It is not. It is here, inside, now. And in that space of stillness, Blavatsky's voice echoes across time. The doors of wisdom are always open, but we must first become quiet enough to notice them. When Helena Petrovna Blavatsky finally emerged from the hidden valleys of the East, she was not the same woman who had entered. Something had been stripped away, and something far older had awakened. The world she returned to, Paris, London, New York, still ran on ambition, ideology, and noise. But Helena no longer moved through it in the same way. She walked with the stillness of someone who had seen the mountain behind the veil, with the certainty of one who had died and been reborn, not in body, but in being. She carried no credentials, no certificates, no formal titles. But what she brought back could not be measured in parchment. She brought presence. She brought vibration. She brought the unseen. The teachings of the East were no longer external to her. They lived within her. The symbols she would later use, The lotus, the serpent, the wheel were not borrowed decorations. They were keys, each encoded with meaning, pointing to inner realities she had touched with her own consciousness. When she spoke of karma, it wasn't theory, it was memory. When she spoke of reincarnation, it wasn't speculation, it was the structure of her very breath. And when she spoke of the masters, many scoffed. Delusion, they said, fiction, fancy, myth. But Helena no longer needed to explain. Because the true initiate knows, truth is not proven, it is lived. And she had lived it, in caves of silence, under skies older than empire, guided by hands most would never see. Oh, she began to build, not a church, not a sect, but a movement, subtle, global, subversive. She called it the Theosophical Society, but it was more than an organization. It was a carrier of codes, a modern vessel for ancient currents. Its foundation was not political, it was esoteric. The very DNA of the society was infused with the principles she had absorbed in Tibet: universal brotherhood, hidden knowledge, the awakening of the inner eye. To the outer world, it looked like lectures, writings, study groups. But beneath the surface, something far deeper was being seeded: the quiet return of the perennial wisdom, disguised in modern clothing. And just like the lamas she had studied under, Helena did not preach. She provoked. She didn't offer certainty, she shattered it. She didn't demand belief, she invited awakening. And for that, the world reacted as it always does when faced with the unfamiliar. Many misunderstood, some mocked, others feared. They called her a fraud, a madwoman, a sorceress, because she did not fit into their categories. She could not be pinned down, labeled, or explained. And in truth, she never tried to be. She knew that her mission was not to be understood, but to plant a seed that would grow silently in the hearts of seekers across generations. She once wrote, "My temple is the universe, my altar is the awakened human heart." She saw the sacred not in rituals but in perception, not in obedience but in awareness, not in the repetition of ancient forms, but in the resurrection of ancient truths. And that's what frightened the establishment. Because she wasn't creating a new religion. She was dismantling the illusions of all religions, revealing the golden thread that runs beneath them all. That thread, she said, is consciousness itself. The same wisdom that shone through Buddha, Christ, Krishna, and countless unnamed sages lives in us, dormant, waiting, longing to be remembered. Blavatsky's legacy was never about creating followers. It was about awakening initiates, people ready to reclaim their own divine nature, to think for themselves, to feel beyond the intellect, to remember what the soul already knows, and perhaps to continue the work she began. Because the world, in many ways, still slumbers, still chases noise, still fears the unknown. But the door she opened has never closed. It is there, now, quiet, patient, luminous. For those who are ready to step through, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky is gone. Her body rests somewhere beneath the soil of another century. Her voice has long since faded from the rooms she once filled. And yet, she has never truly disappeared. Because some legacies are not written in stone or bound in books. Some legacies are vibrations, carried in silence, moving through time like a whisper in the soul. Blavatsky was not merely a seeker. She was a bridge between East and West, spirit and matter, the visible and the invisible. She did not come to preach. She came to disturb, to unsettle the slumber of the modern mind, to break open the walls of certainty and point toward the unnameable. She was fierce, misunderstood, often feared, and entirely human. She struggled, she failed, she wept. But still she walked, through deserts of doubt, across oceans of exile, into the frozen winds of the Himalayas. Not for fame, not for salvation, but because something called her, something deeper than desire, something more ancient than words. And in answering that call, she lit a fire, not one that demands worship, but one that invites us to remember. Her journey is not just history, it is a map, A map for those who have grown weary of shallow answers. A map for those who have searched through churches, through screens, through endless philosophies, and still feel a quiet emptiness inside. She teaches not through dogma, but through example. She teaches that the path is real, that initiation is real, that the soul, when called, will not be silenced, and that beyond all illusion, beyond titles, roles, systems, and fear, there is something waiting. Some call it truth, some call it the self, some call it God. She called it awakening. And when she declared herself a Buddhist, she was not joining anything. She was stepping into the fire of her own transformation. She had not changed religions. She had changed realities. She had crossed the threshold from belief to direct perception, from theory to being. And in doing so, she became something rare, a woman who burned her own illusions so others might see their own shadows more clearly. That is her legacy. Not the institutions built in her name, not even the books she left behind, but the spark she planted, in minds willing to see, in hearts willing to feel, in souls ready to return. Because that's what all true teachings do. They do not give you answers, they give you yourself. So perhaps in these last few minutes, something has stirred within you, a memory you cannot name, a longing too subtle to explain. Maybe it came as a pause, a breath, a quiet ache, a sense that there is more, and you've always known it. That is her whisper. That is the echo of her footsteps, still walking beside us. Because her story is not over. It is ours now. You don't need to travel to Tibet. You don't need to abandon your life or renounce the world. You only need to listen, deeply, honestly, bravely. Because the call that reached Blavatsky's soul over a century ago, the one that pulled her across continents, through ridicule, through fire, is still echoing today. And maybe, just maybe, it's reaching you, not through thunder, but through the soft, trembling silence inside your chest. The question is no longer whether it's real. The question is, will you follow it?